Today we are here to explore one of the most pressing and promising frontiers of Africa's development, which is unlocking capital for deep tech and research-based innovation. Today we are asking a lot of questions that we think are vital, and we'll have really smart and insightful people respond to those questions because we believe that the future of Africa lies quite heavily in deep tech. So we'll be asking a lot of questions. We'll be asking, how do we de-risk and fund transformative technologies emerging from African labs and research centers? We would also be talking a lot about what models of collaboration between government, industry, academia, startups, investors, and all the stakeholders involved that can unlock a scalable impact. So it's not just about talking deep tech, but we want to know how we can take Africa further with deep tech. And most importantly, we want to ensure that African ingenuity is not only funded, but scaled across borders and generation. Without further ado, I'm going to be calling on my colleague, Faith, who is the programs manager at CcHUB and at HEI, to give a warm opening remark, and then we will immediately begin the session. Thank you.
Bonsoir. That's my little attempt at French. Good evening, everyone. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold. My name is Faith Masiwomboye, as mentioned, and I am a programs manager within higher education institutions practice, which we'll get to learn more, of course, through this session, and also just as we move along and learn how exactly it is we're working to continue being the largest Pan-African ecosystem enabler, and also additionally how we're supporting the commercialization of research work across the continent. So at this point, I'd like to speak more about the organization. Just to introduce CcCHUB. So who exactly are we? You've heard of us, maybe you haven't. Great, you're here, you get to learn about us. So CcCHUB, as mentioned, we are the leading and largest Pan-African creative and innovation ecosystem enabler. What this means is we are working across the continent to support entrepreneurs, innovators, to scale and to work within the continent. So we do this through our various work. We work within different sectors, within various industries to support the innovators and entrepreneurs within these spaces. And this shows within what we call our practices. Just an example, we have practices focused on education. We have practices that are focused on health, on the creative industry, and additionally on the green and sustainable space. How exactly do we speak about our work? You can see the numbers from the amount of money we've invested to startups across the continent, the amount of jobs we've created, our community, which is Pan-African. We're not just based in one country, we do work across the continent with physical presence currently in 5 countries. That's Kenya, Namibia, Rwanda, Nigeria, and freshly coming soon, Togo. We have worked with various organizations over the past 15 years, from the African Development Bank to the African Union, Gates Foundation, the MasterCard Foundation, and okay, so we spoke about the HEI innovation practice. What exactly is it that we do? Our mission is to foster a culture of innovation within higher education institutions across the continent and develop the capacity to contribute to economic prosperity across the continent. How exactly do we do this? We summarize this in 4 ways. So 1, nurturing the growth of students and academic innovators with cutting-edge know-how to solve complex problems through innovation. We also reshape the perception of HEIs and their role in society. There's always a very traditional outlook to what exactly universities do. So trying to change that not only within the university space and academia space, but also within the innovation ecosystem across the continent. Additionally, advancing the capabilities of universities to contribute to the emerging innovation ecosystem in Africa. We will be diving into that as we look at how exactly can can deep tech be supported within universities and the innovation ecosystem? How can they merge, and how can we then lead to not only commercialization, but also fundraising for these solutions to be developed across the continent? And lastly, building the capacity of African universities to participate in collaborative research projects with local and international partners, and additionally also within startups that exist within our ecosystems. At this point, we do have a short video that shows our work. We can just play it, then we'll kick things off. Hey, okay, here it is.
I'm George Olwach. I'm a postgraduate student, a PhD student from Pan-African University. My product is a bactericide against bacterial wilt disease in potatoes. Bacterial wilt disease is generally a disease of potato that has caused a lot of problems to farmers. And like, for example, in Kenya, more than 70% of farms in Kenya are affected by the bacterial wilt disease. And close to around 600,000 farmers are getting a lot of losses, between 50 to 100% losses. There is no commercially available bactericide that can be used to control the disease. In this innovation, we are using nanotechnology to control the disease. We are using a component of essential oil called thymol. We encapsulated it in chitosan nanoparticles so that to protect it against environmental challenges, and of course also volatility, so that it can be able to stay in the soil for a long period of time. Thymol is generally has bactericidal effect, though the challenges with it is that when it's exposed to the environment, it can easily lose its ability to work. So this is the product that we produced after encapsulating it in chitosan nanoparticles. So this enables it to be released in the soil slowly over a longer period of time. So with this, we have tested in the lab, that is in vitro work. We have also tested in the greenhouse, and currently we are working with farmers, and it has shown a lot of efficacy in the field. The main challenge was the encapsulation process, because it's an essential oil. But after trials and of course a lot of reading, we were able to encapsulate it and test it and confirm it through different tests to confirm that it is well encapsulated. So far, we have worked with a number of farmers, and of course some are in Kiambu, others are in the other side. And the feedback is quite positive. And in fact, one of the farmers told me that when he compares his field, his farm with the neighbors' farms, his farm is doing much better. So the product in the field is quite promising, and we are hoping that if we continue with it, it can be a solution to many farmers, not only in Kenya and Africa, but if possible, worldwide. A statement I can give to especially the students. So when you are planning to do an innovation, first of all, come up with a very clear problem that you want to solve, a problem that directly affects people that you intend to. That is the market that you intend to. To the investors, one thing that I want to tell them is that they need to believe in the innovators and take them along. Of course, provide them funding as they continue improving on their product. The demo day, I'm looking forward to meeting the investors and to show them how effective the product is. And of course, from there, I'm looking forward to getting more support so that we can be able to roll out the product effectively to the people who really need it.
Okay, does that give you an idea of what it is you're going to be talking about today? Do we have ideas? Do we have an idea of where we're going? Okay. So I would like to introduce someone else who's just going to speak briefly about more of our work, and more specifically about a report that we published that speaks more to the power of youth innovation in terms of supporting research-based innovations across the continent. Jude, welcome to the stage. A round of applause.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Please, can we go? Yeah, can we go back to the next slide, please? Last year, as part of the work that we do in supporting innovators across the continent, and this is work that we've done in Kenya, from the example that you've seen, and in Nigeria, and in Southern Africa as well. One of the things that was clear to us was some of the deepest challenges that we have on the continent are challenges that we can already, try to solve using research and innovation. Not just research and innovation from the perspective of digital technologies, which we are already mostly used to, but R&D work that's going on within our universities. And we do know already that universities play a critical role in the innovation ecosystem for any thriving national innovation system across the world. So last year we decided to publish a report, a white paper, and as I go through this and during the panel, we'll share with you a card where you can already download what a white paper looks like. But it was our effort to say there is a need to already start looking at Africa's challenges and the vision that we have to solve some of these most critical challenges that we have on the continent using research that's coming up from research institutes, but much more importantly from higher education institutions. Next slide, please. As part of the report, we did to look at what we think Africa will look like tomorrow, basically leveraging the Africa 2063 agenda that the heads of state of 54 countries agreed to, in line with the Sustainable Development Goals as well. And one of the things that we tried to correlate was what vision do we have for Africa, and much more importantly, how does research and development and innovation within universities, and much more importantly, the deep tech solutions really, how do they key into these challenges and this future that we want to see? Next slide. We define innovation as a bridge, which is, there's an Africa today that is currently, for example, farmers suffering from diseases or healthcare challenges that are prevalent. I used to joke that if malaria was a global north disease, it would probably have been eradicated by now. But science-based solutions to critical challenges that we have on the continent, that is not just a problem that buying and selling can solve. And one of the things that we said is innovation coming from universities with a culture of research directed towards the problems that we are really, really facing. For example, you see Dr. George Holwach, which the product that we supported him to create is actually his PhD thesis. Has provided a critical bactericidal solution for potato farmers in Kenya. And that solution is not just applicable to only potato farmers because it's a clear, innovative methodology that can already be applied using nanoparticle encapsulation to other diseases as well within the agricultural value chain. Next slide, please. But critical challenges exist within HEIs, and it's more like this is the solution that we think is relevant to solve some of these deep challenges that we see. But these are the challenges that inhibit us from using that solution. And we share a problem tree here in our work with British Council to just show disconnect between industry and academia, which is industry players. For example, you have a bactericidal company in Kenya who is trying to sell fertilizers or sell bactericidal solutions to farmers, but are not necessarily in contact with researchers in maybe Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture or Federal University of Agriculture, for example. In George Holwach's case, that was not the case because it was a very clear industry-academia connect in terms of the problem that exists within the industry and an academic and research-based solution. Next slide, please. We try to provide a number of trends in the report. And much more importantly, I think this is one of the very clear ones. Innovation hubs are now being set up within our HEIs on the continent in an effort to support innovation from students, from researchers. And while we commend this increasing trend, I think it's very, very clear that one of the things that a number of other challenges, let me just put it that way, beyond just setting up innovation hubs within campuses, institutional strengthening for research-based innovations, for example, technology transfer offices, funding, which is capital, which is what we're talking about for this summit. Not just in the beginning for when you researchers or innovators already have a viable prototype, but also down the line of this is actually new innovation that is patentable, that is intellectual property. How do we fund these kind of ideas, or how do we connect these kind of ideas to already existing startups or industry to take this to the next level? Next slide. We identify, I think this is my final slide, we identify finally what we call 7 mountains. And we use mountains because this is Africa. And there are lots of them. Well, 7 mountains in terms of what we really think is very important in terms of if we want to power the future of the continent, what are these 7 challenges that we have to focus on solving? Innovation culture within HEIs, technology transfer management in terms of whether it's even transfer from the global north to the global south or to the continent, or transfer from academia to industry. R&D culture within industry, this is also something that's very, very prevalent, because a lot of the R&D culture that exists today is usually R&D that is in partnership with research institutes in the global north or in the west. But they focus on our own institutions here in the continent that then also increases our researchers per capita, for example, or the kind of competencies that we have to be able to solve these problems. Industrial academia linkages, I think I've already mentioned this. Intellectual property management, funding for MVP development, which I mentioned earlier, and the value of that, which is Dr. George Holwatch now actually has a product. How do we get that product into the market, which is the topic of our panel today. And I really do hope to share some of these insights that we have. Next slide, you would see the QR code for the report, but we'll also share the cards with you before you leave here today so that you can scan and see what kind of insights that we think is very, very relevant for the work that we're trying to do. Ultimately, one of the very strong beliefs I have is that Africa needs to stop being a consumer of technology and innovation. And we need to shift into being co-producers of technology and innovation, especially when it's like 0 to 1 technology. A majority of that happens within universities research and within research institutes as well. Of course, companies to a very large extent, but we need to go to that extent where we're actually now also innovating and solving these big world problems. For example, the climate crisis, to just close again, the climate crisis is a crisis that I think we can only solve with science and with innovation, like research and innovation. And one of the ways to do that within the continent, especially for adaptation and a number of other solutions that we have, is to strengthen where is our knowledge production coming from. We hear more of this in the panel, but next slide, please. If you like to get the report, the QR code. Okay, I see they rearranged my slides. We'll share the cards with the QR code, and then you'll be able to scan the report and see what's there. Thank you very much.
Okay, Jude, I think you can just, yeah. So I'll be introducing the panel next. And first we have Jude Adejuwon, who is the current lead for CcHUB Namibia and additionally leads the HEI innovation practice at CcHUB. We can give him another round of applause. On the panel, we also have Uyoyo Edosio, who is an ICT and innovation expert from the African Development Bank. Let's welcome Uyoyo. We have Mariam Diop, who is the Africa VC regional lead at the International Finance Corporation. Welcome. And lastly, we have Sidik Bakayoko, who is the founder and CEO of Paradise Game, a startup based here at Abidjan, Ivory Coast. Round of applause, everyone. We'll jump right into it as to why we're here. We'd definitely love to know more about our panelists, which we'll get right into shortly. But again, welcome to this session and thank you for joining us. And we are going to be having a very important conversation just based on also the information that we've shared just before this. And this is going to be tackling a very critical and underexplored space within our continent. How exactly do we unlock capital for deep tech and research-based innovations across the continent? So let's jump right into it. Mariam, I'll start with you. I will be asking you a question, but just before that, just introduce yourself, where you're joining us today, who you are, where you're joining us from. So Mariam, you have worked within the investment space across the continent, and you've backed innovation in frontier markets across the continent. What makes Africa's deep tech opportunity both misunderstood and undervalued?
Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. So my name is Mariam Diop. I'm based in Senegal, and I currently lead the African Venture Capital team at IFC, covering both direct investment into startups, but also investment in venture capital funds. So first of all, I love the topic. It's a hard one usually for venture capital investors, and I would tell you why. I think the first problem here, going back to your question, is a visibility problem, because less than 1% of the global VC funding went to African startups. I think it was in 2023, so it's even worse now. And of course, deep tech ventures were clearly underrepresented. It's, first of all, because most of them are embedded in research centers, universities, research institutions, etc., or led by founders who are usually operating outside the typical venture networks. So they clearly not on investors' radars. And I also think there is a big perception gap, because many global investors still see Africa as a low-tech market, especially when they compare Africa to developed markets, which is somewhat true. But it's also important to note that in Africa, founders are not just solving basic problems. They are solving fundamental problems with major complexities, such as access to electricity, access to healthcare, good healthcare, for example. In Africa, 60% of the population does not have access to electricity. And in some countries, there is only one medical doctor for 100,000 inhabitants. So these are clearly fundamental challenges. And we are seeing many companies that are solving these issues, leveraging AI, leveraging IoT, leveraging many deep tech solutions. And they are by default called deep tech ventures, but it's just sometimes, first of all, because they are not on investors' radar, but also because it takes longer time for them to become successful compared to their peers in comparable markets. So it's usually make it difficult for investors to forge conviction to back them early on. And I also see a valuation bias problem, of course, because to be very candid, venture capital investors are usually very reluctant to backing deep tech founders. Deep tech is hard for venture capital investors. It's an outlier business, that's first. And it's solely based on exit and potential returns, right? So that's the definition of commercial investment. So deep tech is usually very IP heavy, very hardware heavy. It requires a lot of capex, a lot of investment, and it takes longer time to exit. So it's not an easy one for venture capital. And I think it will probably change when we start seeing more success stories, like recently InstaDeep in Tunisia, which was sold to BioNTech for over 500 million, like Data Profit in South Africa, that's really making their strides towards expanding internationally, etc. But until then, it will remain a challenge.
I hope by the end of this conversation, it's less of a challenge than it is now. So we would like to hear from Yoyo. Again, from your perspective, of course, working from the bank. We know FDB has worked across the continent. over the past, God knows how many years, just to improve the continent and also just to support innovators, especially academic innovators. But then again, science-based innovations are probably not as well recognized as they can be. So we'd like to hear what is your perspective about that. So why, and why does it cost us? And of course, please remember to introduce yourself.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, that works. My name is Uyoyo Adosio. I'm a Chief ICT and Innovation Expert at the bank. So what that means is I lead the bank's digital transformation action plan. Essentially, at the bank, digital means we focus on 3 areas. The first is digital infrastructure, where we look at connectivity, setting up innovation clusters, investing in affordable devices, and the whole 9 yards associated with digital infrastructure. The second thing we look at is digital skills and entrepreneurship, which this topic definitely falls well within our radar. And the third is what we're calling sectoral adoption of digitalization. So in terms of ICT and innovation, over the past decade, the bank has done about $3 billion invested. And when you look at our skills and entrepreneurship and innovation portfolio, we have done $2 billion. So gross, we have done about $5 billion just investing from infrastructure to skills in barely 10 years. So that gives you an overview of the type of work we do, and we cover the whole of Africa because they are member countries. Now, your question is really interesting, Faith. And I think I want to throw a question back to the audience. How many of you went to universities and did this game-changing final year thesis, especially science students? And what happened to that afterwards? Yeah, yeah. You see very smart people, biotechnologists, nanoengineers, and then they end up in the bank. Because, I mean, that was the best paying job. Myself, I am an example. Like, I studied computer science as an undergraduate, and I did this fuzzy logic system that helps with early detection of HIV. It ended up on my supervisor's desk, and I'm sure it has been burnt by now. But what I'm trying to point out is there's a leakage. There's a leakage from our academia to industry. And that leakage must be closed. At the bank, when I got into the bank, and I'm so happy you put the Pan-African University, because it's an example of one of the projects that I used to lead. When I got into the bank, I realized that we had poured in so much investment into churning out researchers. And when you go for your post-evaluation, they're working in a bank, maybe a supermarket, maybe something that mismatches their skills, and you're like, wow. And we came back to the bank and said, we need to set up this. We need to be more serious about the triple helix model, where academia, industry, and research meet. And so Pan-African University was our first example, was at least when I was in the bank, the first example, Pan-African University setting up academic centers of innovation. And we're very intentional that the skill set that should lead the innovation hubs must have a private sector mindset. Because we had tried everything. We had tried professors sitting down, giving research capacity. They can only guide you on a great research, right? They cannot really lead you on the market. And so what we did was, if we get an incubator or an accelerator hub to franchise their model, but focus on research and development, can we bring commercial value out of research? I mean, we spent 18 months one way, and I think I was in tears in my first time when I was seeing the innovations that were coming out of this, and the fact that these researchers who were used to getting some for $1,000 grant for a paper, we're actually getting invested in to test out their ideas and to set up their own businesses. And they were put on the same metrics like a startup who has to please his VCs. I feel that there is a mismatch in terms of the skill set in academia and the skill set in industry. And we don't have men in the middle ground that will be able to take that skill set and commercialize it to the market. It's unfair asking academias to have a business mindset. The research is hard enough. But then it's unfair asking private sector to come into research and do all that work, because Africa's market isn't easy at all. And so we need set of deep tech innovators or investors that see opportunity and can really bring that transfer of innovation from academia to the market. So my answer to this is we need to close that leakage. We need to close that leakage. If not, institutions like us, we keep pouring money and we'll keep counting numbers, 3,000 researchers developed, but then it's going to leak up. They're all going to either be taken away through brain drain, go to sectors that do not match their skill sets. Now let me give you just a potential. Let me paint a picture. In Africa, we only produce 1% of the research needed. Africa by 2050 will have the highest population of young people, the highest population of people, and then we only provide 1% insight to the problems that are troubling to us. Now, when you break that down 1%, you'll see that 60% of the 1% comes from foreign investment, which means there's a saying that he who pays the piper dictates the tune. That's why, Jude, there's no cure for malaria yet. It hasn't been commercialized because the piper and the tune, there's a mismatch. So until we start at the barest minimum, just closing that gap, taking individuals like my fuzzy research, fuzzy logic research, or you guys, or even the guys coming behind, until we start closing that and fix it for now, then maybe we can solve an efficiency issue and grow it more. So let's close that leakage. That's what I'll say. Let's close it. Thank you.
Thank you, Yo-Yo. And when you speak about closing the leakage, I think also it also speaks to the opportunity for collaboration that exists within this space. And collaboration could be in different sectors. We have academia coming in. We have the private sector, as you've mentioned. We have the investor community coming in. But also I think something that's important is also the startup ecosystem themselves. Because these are people who founded businesses from an idea. It may not have been deep tech, but they still have experiences within this space. And at this point, I would like to hand it over to Jude, who sits at a very strategic position as you're speaking about this leakage. So he sits at the intersection of universities and the startup world. As we mentioned, as a Pan-African innovation ecosystem enabler, we're well balanced within the innovation ecosystem across the continent. And to you, Jude, I would ask, so why has the continent struggled so much to convert research work into investable innovations? And also, if it changes, what is at stake?
Thank you very much. I don't know if I have to introduce myself again, but I do lead the HEI innovation practice in CcHUB and also the Namibia team. Like we said, CcHUB is across 5 locations, Namibia including one of them. Great question. In terms of, we have these conversations. There's nobody that have met and we've sat either on a panel or a side conversation that doesn't think we need to close the gap, like you said, and most of the time, some of them, in fact, you'll be surprised how many very smart people within our organization actually had commercializable final year thesis. Our CFO master thesis was an AI model for breast cancer recognition. And that was just like, you just packed it there. The challenge is quite a number of things that I think I already mentioned that when I was making this presentation. But one of the very critical ones that I think is very clear, that I also think Miriam, you alluded to, is perception. There is a culture of universities in Africa are where you go to get a certificate. And then once you get a certificate, you can then apply that, anywhere else you fit to get a job. Because in a way, we're still in that survivalist market, if I could put it there. So you see a lot of researchers who have very quality ideas. Some of them take it the next step if they are like postgraduates, maybe they are doing a PhD and actually build a prototype. Some of them don't, and just, basically say, I can't move forward because I want to do something else. I'd rather get a job, or I'd rather just get my certificate. Within the university, the culture also promotes research. And that's one of the things that in CcHUB for our practice, we don't focus on innovative research because we already know that there is a culture of deep research. It's easy, for example, to find a university faculty in the average university in Africa already partnering with someone from Charité University in Berlin or University of Atlanta, or basically just trying to do something and contribute to that kind of research. But it basically just ends there. And that's the challenge that is the all. Because once you do that and you get published, you get promoted. And then you want to get in the next 5 papers so that you become a senior professor and a professor emeritus. And that's the North Star in a way. So this perception of universities within the university, within academia itself, has basically just approaching research for research as an end in itself, not research as a means to an end, is a serious challenge. And that perception already also translates to industry. So when you see majority of the big corporates in the manufacturing industry or in the services industry looking out for R&D to improve their product line, they don't look to African universities or African research institutes. They would rather look elsewhere. And maybe one more point to highlight, again regarding this perception, when I first joined CcHUB, and we're going to go for a conference, which was a startup ecosystem, you know all these conferences that we go for, that investors go as well. I said we're going to take all the research innovators within academia to go for the startup conference. And you could already see within the guys I was talking to, almost a mismatch of, are they really fit for that environment? Because the idea of innovation, even though they are innovating, does not immediately click that a technology and innovation conference is something that you should attend. And again, that speaks that this same perception that I'm talking about. And there are consequences for that. It means when investors are thinking about investing, they're not thinking about, even like you, Miriam, you mentioned, they are not in the radar. When they're thinking of even skills or getting skills of how to talk to an investor or how to pitch, the researchers who already have those ideas don't pick up those skills because, I mean, learning by doing is a concept that every startup CEO already knows you have to do over and over again before you perfect this. Finally, I think the cost can be immense. It means that malaria, for example, gets delayed in solving. Because I use malaria, for example. If COVID-19 was an Africa problem, I just imagine that. I mean, it's a popular sentiment. The AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, which was one of the, I think one of 3 or 4 candidates for the vaccine for the mRNA technology, was a partnership between University of Oxford and AstraZeneca. And that singular partnership between industry and academia that led to a product in that global pandemic time saved more than 6 million lives just by that partnership. And so that's the cost, literally. So if I want to answer that question literally, in an hypothetical scenario, the cost of where we are right now could be 6 million African lives. And that's why I think this is very, very important. And we're talking healthcare, but it's not just also healthcare. It's also like in other industries as well, agriculture, food security, and a wide range of sectors. Thank you.
Okay, I think a new perspective has entered the chat. The COVID vaccine that you received is a result of the conversation that we're having here. So I think this is relevant to everyone all of a sudden, yeah? And we would like to hear from someone within the startup ecosystem. Someone's actually established something we'd like to call an IP-rich business. And to you, Siddiq, I'd ask is maybe more specific about your journey as a startup founder. What were the pain points that you had, the opportunities that were laid before you and supported you creating an African deep tech solution, especially based on local knowledge?
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Siddiq Bakayoko. I'm the founder of Paradise Game. I think I was crazy enough a little bit less than 10 years ago to decide to go into entrepreneurship. And I think I'm probably the only one on the stage. So let me go back a few years and then try and explain you that the painful train it's been, but the amazing journey it's been as well. A couple of things that I have to mention. One thing is back when I was in university and started working, I was born and raised here, but then eventually went abroad to study. And my first immersion into the real world was through entrepreneurship. I was working with an entrepreneur working on very advanced high-tech, in a high-tech company based in New York. And I remember that was the first time I was stung by the entrepreneurship virus. And I think at that time, what you want to do when you're an entrepreneur is you just throw the ball and run after it without thinking about how it's going to go, where am I going to go, how am I going to figure it out, but you just run. And I think the same thing applies here in Africa, even worse, is where you start your business, you have no funding, you have close to no support, especially when you look at certain types of business. I look at one of the business that we did which was gaming. I think it took my mom probably 3 or 4 years to understand what I was actually doing. And where you start, you have nobody that understands what you are doing. Everybody that's telling you this is not going to work here. Nobody's trying to fund you or support you. So you have to go through that journey by yourself and actually make sure that the market picks up, understands what you're doing, that people get the value of what you're bringing to the table. We're lucky enough today, we work with Bandai Namco, we work with Ubisoft and some of the likes. So I think now some people are understanding what we are doing here. But when I'm talking about some of the pain points, I think we talked a lot about funding. I think it's the same in every entrepreneurship venture. Having access to capital is very difficult. A lot of the banks here are traditional and trying to just give you money and then charge you a lot for it. But we really have a deep need for impact investors and people of that sort, or government back debt if we're talking about investing in projects such as deep tech, because it takes a long time. The R&D is long, it's tedious. You have to kind of like go through a lot of the hurdles before you actually get to a point where it's actually commercial, where it's actually it makes sense for people to get it. So we need a lot of ways to be able to support that kind of projects, or those kind of projects. If I have to give a couple of examples of things that I've seen here that I think should be probably supported, when you look in the US, the likes of MIT and Stanford and things like that are in universities that are structured, geared towards preparing students to become potential startups owners, and a lot of small, medium, big-sized companies do use the knowledge that you have in those universities, do work a lot with them on building their product. And I think the same should apply here. It's actually an opportunity. There's one university in Côte d'Ivoire that's called INPHB that I've started doing a bunch of things, including labs and partnerships with international companies / organization to be able to support projects that are going to be made and that are going to be supported by university research. And I think those are the kind of things that we need to push and support. From the entrepreneur standpoint, I think it's great, value. They can add and provide a lot of value for not much money to invest, from an entrepreneurship, standpoint. And I think those are the kind of things that we as entrepreneurs need to look more into, working with universities, figuring out how they can support some of those ideas. Because, there's one thing to wake up in your bed and say, oh, I have this brilliant idea, I want to make money, or I want to change people's lives. But then you need to be able to go through a process of figuring out, okay, will this work? If I do it, how much would it cost? How am I going to do it? What are some of the data that are available out there? And I think academia has, years and years of experience in structuring an approach in ideas to make sure that in the end we figure out whether it could make sense or not. Then again, entrepreneurship, there's a great dose of uncertainty, or where you have to kind of like make bet and jump into it. But I think, if you have academia, you have the support of people who are skilled and experienced, it could definitely help and support in reaching further. And one of the other examples that I've seen, and that I think, those are for very early stage startups that I've seen, is that the studio style, entity that kind of like recruit people to become entrepreneurs, support them by providing, technical expertise and support. And I think this is a model. I mean, I'm waiting to see how it's going to prosper, but when I see it and I compare it to my experience when I was starting on my own, I think this will definitely help and push those entrepreneurs who are into various kinds of fields. And I think deep tech is definitely one of the it's going to be the same thing. I think everybody's talking a lot now about artificial intelligence and how it's going to apply to agriculture, to to healthcare, and to all of those things. I think it's important for Africa as well to start looking at those technologies, very advanced technologies, to try and solve problems. There's opportunities, and we need, as entrepreneurs and people who have smart ideas, to come up with creative ways to be able to go to those, get onto on our own markets and be able to provide things that will change our continent.
Thank you, Siddiq. You've reminded me of a quote that there's a professor that we work with that says it a lot. Africa does not have a shortage of problems. We have so many problems. Every day we can think of a solution to one. And now that leads us just into the next part of the discussion, where we discuss, okay, deep tech and research-based innovations exist across the continent. They exist across various HEIs across the continent. So how can they work? This is in terms of tools, mechanisms, what can be created or what already exists that could work to unlock the real capital for deep tech. So this could be from the VC space, could be from organizations such as AFDB, and also just from the private sector. So Mariam, to you, would like to know, are there any specific financing structures that you can think of, maybe 2 to 3, blended finance, catalytic capital, or risk-sharing tools that could realistically unlock institutional capital for deep tech in Africa?
Thank you so much for the question, and great insights from my peers here. First of all, I think when it comes to venture capital investment, there's key African deep tech ventures, and ventures in general are usually misclassified by global investors as too early stage, not scalable, or not commercially viable. So it's difficult from the get-go. But I think the main problem to solve is ownership. Because as Yo-Yo was saying earlier, most of Africa's research today is either led by foreigners, or donor funded, or funded by other sources of capital. When I think it's very important to fund local research from national budgets to start with. We need to create the right incentives for Africans to do more R&D. We need at some point to also, I think, embrace the culture and the mindset of failure very early on. It costs capital, but it's fine, it's okay. Because there is a benchmark that says, for every $1 invested in digital innovation, so I'm biased here, I'm VC, so I talk about digital innovation, it can generate $20 in GDP growth. I mean, this has basically led to the success stories that we know, China, South Korea, and all the emerging markets. They spent decades investing heavily in R&D. South Korea, for example, in the early 1960s, they were poorer than Kenya. But after investing heavily in R&D today, they are spending 4.5% of their GDP in R&D, when Africa is only spending 0.4%, and most of it actually come from South Africa. So there is, I think, a cultural shift and, of course, a paradigm shift here that we need to, first of all, to consider. So in terms of the instruments, blended finance with first loss capital is probably one of those. Using first loss capital from donors to crowd in more private investment and to de-risk early stage investment, because that's basically the most important thing. So for $1 invested, we provide $1 first loss capital to cover basically the investors and create the incentives for them to invest more. We're seeing more and more revenue-based financing because I think it's probably, it suits perfectly the very slow growth curve of the deep tech ventures in general. I mean, this is not, it doesn't fit the VC economics, but I think that's very innovative, and this is something I think we need to explore. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mariam. Uyoyo, in a situation where the bank were to lead a continental deep tech or R&D to industry fund, what would be its key design features, and what type of public and private sector partnerships would you prioritize to make this a success?
That's a good one, Faith. So if we were to lead a deep tech venture or a program around deep tech, I'll look at it from the actors and the actions perspective, because like I said, it's a value chain. Different players have different role, and it would be simplistic to think, let's just focus it on the researchers, let them become more entrepreneurial, let them go to market, let them learn to talk to the VC investors. That would be quite unrealistic. First, it starts with the government's role, right? Many African institutions need to really upgrade their scientific research center. So you saw Pan-African University on the screen today. But what I didn't tell you was that that was a $30 million investment to get those equipment. Many of them we had to import in millions of dollars, and they had the support from the African Union, the African Development Bank, GIZ, JICA. We all chipped in our cash in terms of grants to help that university become what it is. Now, if you look at deep tech, technology is very responsive. Today you're here, there's 5G tomorrow, it's rapidly changing. How do you expect, or who is going to bear that cost? And so this is where sovereign institutions and DFIs, development finance institutions, come in. We need to help. We need to step in to help these universities, revamp curriculum, revamp scientific equipment, upgrade teachers' capacities. Many of the teachers in those schools really need help because obviously it's garbage in, garbage out, really. And so that's the institutional level. Now, when you move down to, and so I'm going to attack it in a triple helix model. So this is the academia itself. But the private sector, we've all talked about there needs to be some sort of perception change. Perception change. But how do we practically bring this into play in Africa? For us at the bank, and I'll give you some examples. A simple tax incentive tied to how much R&D you consume that could change, that could be a game changer. A simple, waiver on certain burdens from the private sector, just tying it back to how much research they've done. Couldn't that be some sort of CSR? That could be tied, to the private sector. And so by so doing, they are incentivized, not forced, to want to uptake and consume innovations from research centers, higher education institution. Now, the second thing is, we need to find a way to plug research to our industrial clusters, right? When you go to many innovation hubs, innovation centers, accelerators, incubator, industrial zone for XYZ, cotton zone, pharmaceutical zones, it's not tied to any research. They are almost bootstrapping it. And so that's, again, a mismatch. Why aren't we tying a major activity in those centers, bringing in research that matters to the industry, bringing researchers in your mixers, right? That's what the startup call it, like, bring them to your mixers. It will surprise you what you will find. Because these mixers, that's where people find co-founders. So I'm business savvy, you're the researcher, you're the deep tech guy, we set up something. I don't have to change my research hat to become an investor, and you don't have to change your investor hat to become, we're like a good melange, like we're well mixed. And so on the industry, we need to be more intentional. We say in bringing them to event, integrating them to industrial clusters, and putting incentive. whether through tax, whether through opportunities for the private sector. Lastly, for the players in this industry, the VCs, the PEs, the accelerators, the incubators, which I call the enterprise support organization. And I'm happy this type of discussions are happening because this is one way to change. Deep tech is hard. It's capex heavy. You don't want to tell any VC or PE fund that you would need like $10 million to buy the equipment and you're not sure of your market yet because you're producing one. There needs to be commercial value, they feel. And for Africa, I think we need to rethink the Silicon Valley model would not work, the VC model would not work for deep tech investors. We need to rethink how we finance them. It will be a blend of, in my opinion, looking at sovereign capital, some sort of first loss guarantees that could make it more attractive for private sectors and other investors to invest in them. But something is an architecture that we need to rethink because simply applying the VCs on low input tech savvy companies that you have your laptop, you have good internet, you have some few developers, you have pizza and caffeine can churn out things. Then a deep tech researcher that has taken 10 years of his time to build a product and finds out it only works on mud, so I have to do another on sand. So we need to really rethink that because it's a long process, high reward, also high risk. And it might be no reward in some instances. So that's the summary of it. As DFIs, we need to step in. If the infrastructure is bad, if the academic institution don't have the instrument, we can't expect deep tech. We're just wishing for the garbage in, like I said, garbage out. For the private sector, it has to be incentivized. And then for the investors, we really need to think, and it's something that we could leverage our DFI financing, some sort of quasi-social commercial capital in that space with parameters that work for Africa. And voila, we'll see a triple helix model on the continent, hopefully. If you guys invest, I see a few of our investors in the audience.
Yeah, that's a good segue. And yeah, I think it's very important to look at the role that everyone plays, and even just yourself as you think about it, what role would you play within this ecosystem? So to you, Jude, just think about if you're given the opportunity to redesign redesign the university ecosystem and engine from scratch. What three elements are you going to include to make it capacity ready?
Yeah, thank you. This question actually just reminded me of a trip I had in Germany to the University of Stuttgart. They had this massive, I can't even call it innovation hub, to be honest, because it was almost 3 kilometers just by the length. And inside of it, there was Mercedes-Benz, there was Porsche, there was Bosch, I could count almost 15 corporate industries. And there were robot arms, like one of the interesting research that one of the companies, I think Mercedes-Benz at the time, was they had partnered with a research group within University of Stuttgart to use artificial intelligence. I think this is probably intellectual property kind of stuff. But to use AI to reduce the length of the cabling in a Mercedes-Benz. Just using AI. So they had to bring out the design of like the cabling, all the cabling to the last T, to the window, to the mirror, and then draw out the skeleton, and then start modeling what would it look like to optimize cabling in a Mercedes-Benz vehicle. And all through the different, I'll call them booths now, but they were already transparent, of all the 15 companies inside the lab, it was a partnership between an industry partner and a research group within the University of Stuttgart. And I think that's where I would start from. If I were to redesign what university research or deep tech research looks like, to say, if you're within the deep tech sectors, health, agriculture, and you're doing innovative research, like you shouldn't start the first step of your research should be to go and identify an industry partner that has, you know, a critical challenge that's very, very clear, or not necessarily like the company challenge, but a challenge within the sector, that is already very clear that the research output from this endeavor has a clear market demand that is, plug and play. Everybody can say. Um, and that would be my first edit to what currently happens within universities and research institutes. The second one would be to also then flip that over to say, uh, the collaboration between industry and academia most times is, and this is an area of research I'm also very interested in, is largely industry, big corporates, and academia. All right. Meanwhile, you really do have, in this age that we live in, startups that are trying to solve a problem. They're very fast. It's easier to make an agreement. It's easier to go into a partnership. It's easier for them to commercialize, while the big guys are still considering whether your research output is worth investing in or not. And the kind of stories I like to hear is what you mentioned, Miriam, InstaDeep, right? How do we get a startup academia collaboration going in such a way that even if the industry, because when you think about the startup world, you're trying to disrupt something that the industry guys don't even care to pay attention to, right? And if you have intellectual property enough to be able to do that, that is already available, how do we get startups to already start picking up this kind of IP that already exists and then going into the market, and then commercializing that and running with it? Because down the line, if it's really deep tech, that startup is going to get acquired, right? And that would be a second tweak to the way I think about it. The last one would be, again, infrastructure. I think infra is very important when it comes to deep tech. And I think you've mentioned, the best of this, which is when you look at digital innovations, when CcHUB started in 2010, by the way, in Nigeria, it was just one floor. And then technical capacity to help any young person in Nigeria who wants to build. You find a community of people who are developers. You find a community of guys who are marketers. You find somebody who is there who has, technical capacity. Like you already said, you're the business savvy guy. You're coming together to just build up the idea, build a product, run into the market, and test it out. We don't have that kind of community for deep tech startups or deep tech solutions in Africa. And the way I'm thinking about it here is, how can we create the infrastructure that is required? That if I have, and I really wish we do have the time to show another very 2-minute video of Daniel. Daniel is building, he's doing his PhD now, by the way, and he has a business that we've already helped him set up. But Daniel is building a reusable diagnostic toolkit for breast cancer for rural women in Africa. For him to build one prototype sample, we had to get him to a 3D fab lab to be able to prototype what is worked on. And then for him to be able to produce like maybe 100 units of that, the next infra available to him is in Abia State in Nigeria, which is 300 kilometers away. So in my mind, I'm thinking, how do we create kind of infrastructure necessary for anyone who has a deep tech solution from research-based innovation and says, I want to produce this, I want to get this out ASAP. And it's not just robotic arms or 3D printers, it's also wet labs for people who are in that space. And in a way that, even if it's not domiciled in one university, it is accessible to other researchers or other innovators in this space. That would be the third thing I think I will try to fix in that space. God help us.
Thanks, Jude. And just to wrap this up from Siddiq, we'd like to know maybe, based on your experience, What support would you think would have made you more investor ready? And of course, just to make it relevant to current innovators, potential startup founders, what would have made you more investor ready? Specifically looking at financial instruments and IP-backed lending, royalty-based finances, amongst others. What would have made you more investor ready?
One of the thing, I mean, just before I answer that, maybe for some of the people in the audience that are not necessarily into deep tech or don't necessarily have a very extensive understanding of it, my understanding of what deep tech is the use of very complex technology, processes, or ways to be able to have an impact on a specific sector, for example, agriculture, energy, and others. And I think one of the key things that we've been discussing here is how do you use universities and people who are in academia to be able to help you go faster, do better, and have a product that's better suited for your market or for whatever you're trying to do. Now, having said that, from an entrepreneur standpoint, if I have to talk about my specific area of expertise, which is gaming, one of the key topics that people have been talking a lot about in the past few years is called gamification. How do you use the concept of gaming? The fact that when you play, you have incentives, you have things that you have to reach before you get to another level, and then you have things that you have to do that allow you to go through a process of reaching the end. How do you use those mechanics of instant reward to be able to apply now to industries that have nothing to do to entertainment? Imagine applying that tomorrow in ways to train or educate people on how they're supposed to wash their hands, on how they're supposed to avoid certain diseases, how they're supposed to drive better on the streets. When you look at Côte d'Ivoire, you see that when you're driving around here, you might need training to do so. So in our expertise, imagine if you're able to have industry or universities that are helping you go through extensive research on how people think, how people behave, how people interact with each other, and how do you use all of that knowledge into making it simpler for people to learn certain things. And that's why at Paradise Game, we have a key thing that we say: entertain, educate, and empower the youth in Africa. And now coming back to your question in terms of how to make it, how do we make ourselves investor ready? That's a key question, because as I told you, we're mad enough to start on our own and to think that we were able to do everything on ourselves. I think it was a cool thing to do it because when you don't have the pressure of somebody else giving you money, you have to figure out how to make it, because if you don't, you die. So I think now, after you're doing it for a few years, now you need to think differently, change your mindset, and be able to talk about it, articulate it better for some people. And I think that's something where you need to be trained for. You need to be supported. And I think, if I had to redo it over, I would probably have gone to an incubator or some of that, that structure of entities to be able to help me kind of like figure out how do you make sure that the idea, the cool thing that you want to do is something where somebody else could invest because it's readable, because there's a clear path into the exit in a few years. There is a clear understanding on who exactly are you talking to, what's your market, how much can you generate, etc. I think we probably lack that, and I think for the newcomers or the new generation, I think we need to figure out a way very early on, maybe even when they're still in school, in universities, they need to be training on entrepreneurship, on how, when I want to start my company, what do I do? What do I need to do? How do I get there? Maybe the additional thing that I can say is, maybe talking to the investors, those of you who are investing in the room, is that Africa is a very different market. So in terms of the way it's presented, the way it's, things are done, the way people are geared towards looking for money is different. Here, most of the investors start by trying to figure out, how do I, make it? How do I build something that's good enough? So if you see an entrepreneur that's been out there for more than 3 years, think that, he's good. If he's been there for 5, 7 years, oh man, he's a genius. So I think, those are the key things that, you need to look at beyond the numbers, beyond the nice presentation, beyond the fact that, he went to this and that school. We need to figure out. I've seen a lot of investments lately which are, you know, probably geared towards more people who have the structure but don't necessarily have the local expertise. You take somebody that hasn't been on the market, that hasn't done businesses here, that don't know that, you know, somebody who doesn't know that when you go and do a business with X or Y company, you're not going to get paid in 30 days, you're going to get paid in 90 or more. And on this business, you know, model, the sheet is all nice, you know, within 6 months I'm going to make it, and 2 years down the road they're still not making money. And I think that's the reality, and you need to look at you know, beyond the nice, you know, people, you know, doing a lot of online LinkedIn stuff. Somebody who has been there for a few years means that, you know, he has something that you know, that he has to provide. And beyond that, try and talk and trying to figure out from the, you know, from the ground, talk to other people that are on the market. Have you seen these people? Have they done something? Who is doing that? I think you might get a lot of names and connection through peers rather than, you know, online and things. And I think one of the key things for us entrepreneurs, I mean, I'm not going to only point to other people. I think from entrepreneurs, we need to figure out how to sell ourselves better. And I think from a how do I say that? From a cultural standpoint, we've been trained and educated to be nice, to be cool, to not talk much about what we are doing, to not brag about what we're doing. But unfortunately, the market is looking at who is actually talking on the market, who is saying that he did this. So I think there's a cultural mind change that we need to do to be able to be investor ready. And I hope, you know, I think we're getting there. You know, when I look at the Francophone market, we're probably a couple of years behind the Anglophone market in terms of, you know, showing ourselves and projecting what we're doing, but I think we're getting there.
Wow, thank you so much.